such as a summary of the scope of work, details on violation. Deputy will assist in facilitating any necessary engagement with the project applicant, and where preferred by this council member with tenants. We look forward to working with the council to ensure the success of this new process. More broadly, we always welcome partnership in identifying buildings in your districts that can benefit from our Article 11 tax exemption program and our other programs. Tax incentives are a key piece of achieving our shared housing goals. We look forward to continuing to partner with the City Council to ensure that our tax exemption tools can create the conditions to ensure we are developing, preserving, and stabilizing housing to meet New Yorkers' needs. Thank you very much.
Good morning, Chair Sanchez, Chair Brennan, as well as members of the Housing Committee and Finance Committee. My name is Pierre Dejean. I am the Assistant Commissioner for Property Exemptions Administration. I am joined by my colleague, Ted Oberman. He's the Director of Commercial Exemptions, Department of Finance. Department of Finance is the administering agency for dozens of property exemptions and abatements. Each year, the Department of Finance oversees an annual expenditure of real property taxes of around $8 billion. These expenditures support older and disabled New Yorkers who are enrolled in our rent increase exemption or homeowner exemption programs. They help businesses find new commercial storefronts, and we assist not-for-profits like our houses of worship by relieving them of their property tax burden so they can better serve our communities. The city's biggest investments are made into affordable housing through programs like 421A, J51, and 420C. The investment totals over $2.7 billion annually. The Department of Finance works day in and day out with taxpayers to make sure these benefits are delivered on time and fairly. Our sister agency, Housing Preservation and Development, are on the front lines of each one of these programs. But we have an amazing working relationship that ensures compliance and proper delivery of these benefits. In addition to the city's bigger development benefits, the Department of Finance manages the Co-op Condo Abatement Program, otherwise known as CCA. There are roughly 330,000 units enrolled, totaling an annual tax expenditure of almost $700 million. This is one of the city's largest benefit programs that we manage, and it is a vital affordability tool for many homeowners who live in a co-op or condo. In 2024, the Comptroller conducted an audit of the CCA program for fiscal years 2019 to fiscal year 2023. The Comptroller's Office found that the Department of Finance generally ensured that the condo and co-op owners who receive tax abatements in fiscal year 23 met all the eligibility requirements of the program. In addition, auditors found that out of the 300 or so thousand units, that 720 units had been found to have not been eligible for the benefit. The auditors, along with the Department of Finance staff, found that over 5 years, between FY19 and FY23, the city granted $6.5 million in benefits to those units out of roughly $3.25 billion in benefits administered during that time period. The Department of Finance worked with auditors and the Comptroller's Office more broadly to comply with the audit. The Department of Finance generally agreed with the audit's recommendations, and we're always looking to improve our processes. The agency took the following steps to address the many issues that were brought up. Removal of co-op condo abatements from the co-op units and developments, including those that, one, did not classify as Tax 2 properties, those that were receiving the UDAP exemption, and units owned by business entities. We recovered as much as $6.2 million in abatements that should not have been granted. We ensured that the submitted prevailing wage affidavits are saved, reviewed for correctness, and associated with correct developments. We ensure that the error from an eligibility code carried over from an old prior computer system had been corrected and is no longer in use to prevent our new system, property tax system, eligibility checks, which have been bypassed in the past, to ensure that ineligible developments and owners are not granted the co-op abatement. We also conduct periodic sample-based testing to check for ineligible units receiving the abatement. These recommendations were not only agreed to last year, but they were also actively in practice today. The Department of Finance's mission is to administer the tax and revenue laws of the city fairly, efficiently, and transparently to instill public confidence and encourage compliance while providing exceptional customer service. The city's tax exemptions are a core function and one that comes with great responsibility. Our work is better and fairer because of the accountability that we are held to. I would like to thank the council for this opportunity to testify today. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much for your testimony, very helpful. I want to acknowledge that we have been joined by Council Members Hudson, Brewer, Ressler, Majority Leader Farias, Majority Whip Brooks Powers, and Councilmember Feliz Ansun. Okay, so I'm going to start with a first round of questions, and we'll go over to Chair Brannan, and then just so you know, Councilmember Ressler, Brooks Powers, and Brewer, we have you in that order. Okay, so question one, just to make sure we are on the same page, what is the total value of real property incentives the city provided for residential properties between fiscal 24 and 25?
For fiscal year 25, the total value of real property incentives was $4.5 billion, and for fiscal year 24, it was $4.3 billion.
Okay, thank you. You may not have this in this way, but HPD, for a typical new construction project, can you share with the council an estimated average net present value for the different incentive programs that are layered onto a project? So the unit, how much subsidy or incentive a unit is receiving when you layer on LIHTC and 421A or 485, Article 11, rental assistance subsidy, just to give us a sense of scale.
I don't think I have it exactly that way, but let me share what I can tell you today, and then we can follow up if there's more specific questions. So a traditional new construction, 100% subsidized by HPD, will receive a full residential property tax exemption. They may also apply if there is a kind of commercial condo within it for ICAP for the commercial component. So full residential property tax exemption. There will be a capital subsidy. The amount varies depending on the programmatic execution. So for our extremely low income program versus our senior program versus supportive housing, which are the three main variations, that can range from like $75,000 to a little over $200,000 per unit. The subsidy in part depends on whether or not there's rental assistance, right? So that variation can be dramatic in part because of rents and then rental assistance. It is very common in supportive housing and our senior housing projects that the city is allocating some form of project-based rental assistance, either through like the 1515 program or project-based Section 8. Those are the two most common forms. Nearly all nearly all new construction 100% affordable projects also receive an allocation of low-income housing tax credits, either 9% credits or 4% credits. And so that allocation drops the subsidy to what would normally be without it, about $450,000 a unit, down to the numbers that I quoted before. And then many, not all, but many of our projects also take advantage of the various zoning incentive programs, so inclusionary housing. It is very common for 100% affordable projects to receive all five of those, like to participate in all five of those various financial assistance programs. And then oftentimes properties will be trying to take advantage of other programs that may be offered by the state, so through NYSERDA, et cetera. So I don't have the NPV, but we can certainly try to follow up and see if we can get you that estimate.
Thank you. And do you have off the top of your head for a recent project, covered by the layering of these 5 programs?
I don't. Let me see if I can get that. And we can either follow up during the hearing or afterward.
Thank you.
It is a very significant percentage.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, I'm going to ask about Article 11s, and then I'll turn it to my colleagues. So first, again, just making sure we're on the same page in terms of numbers. How many properties currently receive Article 11 tax benefits?
So overall, you can get up to a 40-year benefit. Currently, there are about 3,400 properties that receive Article 11 benefits from the city.
Thank you. And could you share for a recent year, last year, fiscal 25-24, what the total annual value of the tax expenditure was?
So in fiscal year 25, we authorized Article 11 exemptions equivalent to just under $20 million. And I don't recall, I think that is for slightly over 6,000 units, but I need to double check that.
Okay, so that's for fiscal 25.
Yeah.
And so that's the annual expenditure in fiscal year 25. Can you give us a range of, again, the net present value of the Article 11 tax incentive from, lowest to highest of programs that are currently participating or buildings that are currently participating?
Yeah, I don't have the NPV numbers with me today, but for year 1 cost estimates, the average is a little over $3,000 a unit.
Thank you. You spoke a bit about process in your testimony, and we have been talking at length about process among council members and the administration, so thank you for those ongoing conversations. Wanted to ask for the record, can you describe your process of outreach to owners in the city that might be able to benefit from Article 11s? Are Article 11s limited to buildings and properties that have a particular cooperative structure? Like, do they have to be HDFCs, or can any property qualify that is residential? And then after your outreach process, eligibility and outreach process, can you tell us about the vetting process for how HPD evaluates buildings and applications for Article 11 benefits?
Sure. So I'll start and maybe speak more broadly, and then I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Carrie Labatz, to talk about preservation specifically. Eligibility, in order to be eligible for an Article 11 exemption, the property has to be owned or be a project of an HDFC. If the property is not currently owned by an HDFC, it has to be transferred to an HDFC to be eligible. Not all owners are interested in doing that, right? And so that in and of itself is one of the main factors that an owner may account for in deciding whether or not they want to apply for Article 11. That's very different than, let's say, J51 or 45X, which does not actually have an ownership requirement, right? Any owner can apply. The type of benefit is going to vary by type for, let's say, J51. Co-op and condos are different than rent-stabilized housing, the eligibility criteria for those types are different. But Article 11, the main requirement is that it is owned by a Housing Development Fund Corporation. That means that under state statute, it is an entity that was formed to own and manage affordable housing, okay? So we do various types of outreach about our work. One more thing I want to actually explain about that. So I mentioned this in testimony, but Article 11 is used very broadly to support all types of HPD affordable housing work, from new construction to preservation, to support rental housing, creation and preservation of rental housing, as well as home ownership. Most commonly HDFC cooperatives, which are limited equity cooperatives. We do a range of type of outreach. We do it most extensively when it comes to existing housing. And then otherwise, in new construction, usually applicants are seeking other financing from us, so it really is through other financing programs. We do community events, stakeholder and trade events to talk about our programs. We provide information through partner organizations. So for example, we work with some community development finance institutions to administer one of our moderate rehab programs. They will then help educate potential applicants about options. We created a loan finder tool that's available on our website. Every program is available on our website, so if anybody Googles us, you're looking at HPD financing programs, you can definitely see everything. It is publicly available information. We get referrals from asset management, enforcement, and other agency partners. Certainly a fair amount from our asset management team. We have done targeted outreach to owners. There are a lot of owners that have HUD-assisted properties that had Article 5 exemptions. Those exemptions have been expiring. They were up to 40 years initially. They've been expiring, so we've done targeted outreach where there's expiring benefits. We have had a landlord ambassador program in the past where we have a nonprofit that works with property owners, and they help educate them about potential HPD programs, and we're hoping to get a new owner resource center up and running relatively soon. So there are, oh, and we actually have one of these today. This is like our little one-pager fact sheet that we could print out and use anywhere. It's on our website as well. That basically has the main programs that are available to property owners with some very basic eligibility. We do tabling events, so there's like a wide range of work that we do. I do want to say, and I'm going to turn it over to Carrie in just a second, that one of the challenges we've had in the last couple years, we know that especially when it comes to existing housing, there's been really rapid escalation of operating costs, and our tax exemptions are really, really, really important to helping owners that have lower cost housing be able to continue to pay the bills, to do capital improvements. And unfortunately, during this time when we would have loved to get out there much more aggressively, HPD also had pretty substantial staffing issues, particularly in the preservation teams. So we've continued to do this work. One thing that we would like to do more of is more targeted outreach to not just properties that have like expiring benefits, but in the past we've been able to work with asset management or neighborhood strategies team to look at buildings that have certain characteristics and been able to do a bit more tailored outreach to them. We'd love to be able to do that again, but unfortunately, until we work through some of the backlog that we've had in preservation due to severe staffing issues, we don't think it is a good idea because we're worried that people will just wait longer and be very frustrated that we can't help them. So I don't know, Carrie, if there's anything else that you would add to that, but that's kind of the overview. Oh yeah, vetting, sorry. That was the other thing we wanted to talk about.
So in terms of application review, Article 11s in preservation finance specifically are paired with projects that receive city capital as well as standalone Article 11 exemptions. So we're initially vetting the applications through the applicable term sheet and sizing the exemption where there is capital to ensure that we're utilizing that resource efficiently, and where there is no capital to ensure that the standalone exemption is supporting not only the upfront affordability, the long-term affordability, as well as the financial viability for the full term of the Article 11. So each application goes through the individual program to review against the applicable term sheet. Once we've reviewed, the project is briefed with City Council, the project goes to a hearing, and we are closing the project, completing our due diligence, and closing on our regulatory agreement. Once the regulatory agreement is in place, the project has closed, our tax incentive staff will review for eligibility, for final eligibility, and issue a certificate of exemption. With that, that goes to DOF, and the regulatory agreement that effectuates the Article 11 exemption.
Thank you. And I know we've talked at length about specific projects that have come through the council that, to us, standalone projects, right? Not as a part of, being a part of a specific term sheet, program, LO, or anything else, but standalone projects that don't seem to rise to the level of what some of us as colleagues think that we should be subsidizing, think that we should be providing Article 11s for, specifically buildings or properties that have very low levels of violations, right, and housing maintenance code issues. So that's one thing that we would love to continue to have conversation about. I'm glad to hear that you're looking at how you can work even closer with asset management and other parts of HPD to make sure that we're targeting these resources to buildings that need it the most. Just a quick follow-up. With respect to eligibility, you said they must be an HDFC. It's a challenge for the agency to work with buildings that may not want to become HDFCs that are privately incorporated now. Would you say that that is the largest barriers in considering the buildings that have the highest number of violations, the biggest issues? Is that one of the biggest barriers to engaging with them and having them go through Article 11s?
Yeah, so just to take a step, so a property that incorporates as an HDFC, they're typically incorporated as nonprofit. You can incorporate it as a business corporation, which is usually for HDFC cooperatives or nonprofit corporation. A property that is owned by an HDFC and is incorporated under nonprofit law, in order to transfer title to the property later, would have to get consent from the Attorney General's office, and there are restrictions on how sales proceeds are used. So for a property owner, right, thinking about restrictions that may not just relate to the term of the benefit, but also potential sale of the property well down the road, even outside of the regulatory term, that is a really serious thing to consider, and whether or not an owner is willing to do that. And so that's very different than like a program where J51, where an existing owner of a rent-stabilized, like lower-cost rent-stabilized housing, or a condo or cooperative, low-cost condo or co-op owner, can apply without transferring title or setting up a special purpose entity in order to qualify for the benefit, okay? That is a big decision that owners have to make, and whether or not, and because Article 11 is outside of J51, really the only tool that we have in preservation, it is probably one of the initial big factors that an owner has to assess in order to decide whether or not they're going to work with the city, okay? Outside of that, we do screening on every project. We won't finance a project that doesn't comply with our program term sheets. And we, as Carrie mentioned just a moment ago, we do, outside of just screening from an eligibility from the term sheet perspective, which in the term sheets outline how much benefit we're willing to provide and what the general requirements are for qualifying for that benefit. We also do a lot of due diligence on projects. So individually, each project is underwritten. We look at who's applying for benefits. We do review of that entity. We look at the portfolio that they own across New York City. We know that owners that are applying for assistance through our preservation programs have buildings that have needs. Otherwise, an owner isn't going to necessarily sign a regulatory agreement with us, right? Because we are going to restrict the use of the property. And so owners that have lots of options are going to go seek other options if it makes sense to them. Owners that need our help have to sign that agreement. And so there is a kind of a screening process involved there. And we know that there are issues in the buildings. The question in our mind when we're reviewing is the owner addressing the issues? And is the assistance we're providing going to help address those issues and stabilize the housing long term, right? And so we'll review for violations. Owners are required to clear violations of his existing housing prior to closing unless they're related to the scope of work that the assistance is helping the owner undertake. We look at the overall portfolio. They have to address violations in their portfolio, municipal debt in their portfolio, regulatory compliance in their portfolio in order for us to be comfortable moving forward. We work with DOI to do checks on properties to see if there are issues that we should, or applicants, issues that we should know about. We look at eviction history. We look at a range of factors to understand who we're doing business with. right? Our goal is to stabilize the housing and keep it affordable long-term. So again, we know there are issues today, and the question is really or not, do we believe, after doing our due diligence, that the owner is going to address those issues there and that the property will be more stable and affordable as a result of the intervention?
Thank you. I want to have a conversation maybe at the end when I'm not holding up my colleagues, but about how the benefits are tailored. But just quickly before I move on to, to Chair Brownie. Chair Brownie. I love a Brownie. Chair Brandon and my colleagues, just wanted to touch on a finding. So in the City Council, in budget negotiations in the past 2 years, we've included in our terms and conditions a requirement for HPD to submit information to us about Article 11 properties. In the most recent report that you submitted to the Council on January 25th, 2025, the report included reporting on 1,265 Article 11 subsidized projects, which had 43,386 open, uncorrected violations of the Housing Maintenance Code as of that time, which is about 1 per unit. Of these, 13,228 were classified as Class C immediate hazards. So on that vein that you just mentioned, violations are required to be corrected unless they're part of the scope of work. Can you help us understand this violation data that you've submitted to the council? Are these violations a part of the scopes of work that you're identifying with these properties? Are they concentrated in certain portfolios? Are they concentrated in Article 11 properties that have had the Article 11s for a long time, or are they newer? Can you share insights on that?
Those are great questions. So I think the terms and conditions report is useful. It is a snapshot in time, and it doesn't get to some of the nuance that you just raised. It's violations at the time of the report. And just to take a step back, so I'm talking today about the policy and the approach that we take to sizing discretionary exemptions today, right? HPD has been providing discretionary exemptions, including through Article 11, for decades, and agency policy has shifted to some degree over that time. Even in the last decade, which is the period of the report, just taking our work in preservation, we have imposed additional requirements on projects over time. We live, we learn, right? We take that feedback and we try to do better. And so, for example, starting not quite 5 years ago, maybe late 2021, 22, we started requiring that any property applying for a standalone exemption for us, not paired with subsidy, would have to do a physical needs assessment pursuant to HPD-dictated methodology through one of the qualified vendors that is on that list. In the past, we would ask owners to clear violations, but we didn't have a standard way to assess building conditions and to assess whether or not owners needed to do additional work at the point in time of our intervention in that property. So this is a really significant shift, and we have looked at the data even in...
When did that start?
I think it was late 2021, early 2022. We issued new term sheets for a couple of the standalone programs around that time, and it was integrated into the new term sheets. We've been requiring that for subsidy programs for a long time, but only more recently for the standalone exemptions. That has made a difference, right? So projects that we finance now with a standalone exemption, they're doing a comprehensive assessment. We see what is in that assessment. We understand what the upcoming needs are in the property. And owners have to do the work that is outlined for the near term that are in that assessment. If they're not getting subsidy from us, they have to enter into a housing repair agreement. And that repair agreement dictates the scope of work, the timeline to complete that work, and also if there are violations, they're going to clear when that work is completed. And we then follow up. So the preservation team run by Carrie here follows up with applicants or owners down the road to make sure they've actually completed the work that they outlined. That's been a major shift, and when we looked at the terms and conditions data, we found that there is, for projects that have completed their construction, there is a very significant difference, even pre and post, when we made that change. And certainly once they complete the work, there's a drop in violations, which would be expected. The other thing I would just note, and then I'll turn it over to my colleagues if they have anything to add, is that not only has the agency policy shifted, the types of issues we're solving for have shifted a little bit. Pre-2019 reform to rent stabilization laws, one of the biggest things that we were solving for with the standalone exemptions was loss of affordability due to deregulation, right? That's a very different set of challenges that we were solving for than the types of issues that we're often trying to solve for today. We're really prioritizing our preservation projects based on urgency of need, right? That doesn't mean that we're also not solving for affordability, but it's a major shift in the focus. And so looking at conditions wasn't our first and foremost priority back in 2015, 16, 17, 18, right? The one other note is that the average violations is relatively high that you're going to see there. That's really driven up by a handful of projects. The median violation count, B and C violations, is about 0.3, and that's pretty modest. We do know that there are a handful of projects and portfolios that have had higher sustained violation issues, and they are on our radar. And so I can turn it over to Lucy to talk a little bit about kind of the monitoring that we do of those projects, if it would be useful.
Great, thank you. And as Kim has laid out, as our focus has changed and some of our policies and practices pre-closing have changed, so has our work on the asset management side, both in response to some of the new information that's coming in, but also feedback that we're getting from various stakeholders, including members of the council. So we are monitoring all of these projects post-closing, and I'll underscore what Kim said about the report. What you're seeing is the snapshot in time of buildings that are in various processes of getting, or various stages of reaching stabilization, right? And ultimately that is what we are trying to achieve by bringing these buildings into regulation, being subject to the additional monitoring that the asset management team is doing. We are attempting to bring buildings into better standards and basically overall stability. So on an ongoing basis, depending on the specifics of the regulatory agreement, which has changed over time as our focus has changed, we do collect proactively documents from the owners, such as bank statements, evidence of insurance, rent rolls. We're looking for indications of operational or financial concerns. Physical distress often follows from those. And so we monitor on an ongoing basis, trying to look for both from the documents that owners are giving, but also from our own independent assessments, looking at violations, et cetera. What do we think is going on, and are we on the path towards stability? I will note there that violations absolutely are one good indicator of challenge, but not the only of physical distress. There are any number of reasons why tenants and New Yorkers generally are not always quick to call 311, so we do have to look at other indicators, and that's something that we try to do across our work at HPD. Our preference is always to bring a building into compliance. It is better for the residents, it's better for the neighborhood, it's better for everyone. And really the regulatory agreement and those additional conditions that we've put on are really geared towards helping us do that. And the vast majority of owners, even when they are struggling, are trying to work with us. And we are absolutely seeing in this environment, and you alluded to this in the beginning, there are rising costs right now that are bigger jumps for buildings than we've seen, and we are having to work with owners creatively to adapt to those challenges. But that proactive monitoring that we're doing and really that we're investing in, and cross-agency collaboration, right? You'll see there are members from across HPD at this hearing today. That really represents the work that we are doing across offices at HPD to monitor the portfolios, to get ahead of challenges. We're always going to try to, when we see an issue, bring an owner in, figure out ways that we can start trying to bring them into better standing for the benefit of the tenants, benefit of everybody. There is a process of escalation over time where we do identify buildings of particular concern that we are worried about, and we will move towards heightened monitoring and have a series of progressive steps that we will take in terms of intervention, starting with lighter touch, again, because the goal is bringing people into compliance, but with that backstop of stricter enforcement. And all of these buildings will continue to get monitored or responses from Enforcement and Neighborhood Services. Should tenants have concerns in the buildings, it's one of those ways that we make sure we are approaching the problem as holistically as possible.
Thank you. So just to get concrete about that, understand the goal of bringing property owners into compliance, understand the escalation. How many Article 11s has HPD revoked in the last 5 years? And what brought you to that stage?
I'll take the second question first and then the first one. We will move through these heightened steps of escalation. So it will begin with every attempt to bring the owner into compliance, assessing, diagnosing what we think is going on. Over time, if that does not seem to be working, or as we diagnose the problem, heightened monitoring, we will look to remove or replace a property manager. That can be an important intervention. We also can condition future agency involvement or actions on compliance. We need to see X so that you can continue with Y. There are some buildings where we determine a financial workout is what's necessary. That could be with HPD financing or external financing. Depending on the circumstances, we may see replacement of the board, transfer of ownership, bringing in a preservation buyer, right? All of these steps that are really geared towards stabilizing the property. The reason why, then we would move to revocation of benefits. The reason why that really is an action of last resort, not just because, we're trying to move through these steps and it's for the good of everybody, but that regulatory agreement that is associated with the benefits is incredibly powerful. When generally, if we revoke the benefits, we don't have those same conditions put on the property. It is in everyone's best interest that we continue to have this backstop of saying, here is what you are being held to, and we are working to bring you into compliance. We have, and unfortunately, we have had to revoke benefits when we've determined that we cannot bring this owner, despite these steps, into compliance, and we don't see another path forward. I did not bring 5-year data, but I can say within the last year, we've revoked benefits twice.
And then what happens to those properties?
It can depend on whether they are in a standalone situation or they have other subsidy or some other regulatory agreement on the property, and what the terms of the regulatory agreement were and what caused the default. But benefits can be ceased, and there may or may not be that regulatory agreement on the property anymore. That is, as I mentioned, usually one of many steps that's happened. So if you're in that place, that's probably not the only thing that's happening.
Thank you. I will stop now, for now, and Chair Brandon will ask his first round.
Thank you, Chair Sanchez. Could you tell us how many projects have received 485X benefits to date, and how many affordable units have been created as a result?
I would be happy to bring my colleague Tricia Dietz up here.
Yes,
So
Hi.
Tricia oversees our. Did you
No,
swear?
I don't think I did.
we got to make you street
Sorry.
legal first.
And nothing but the truth before these committees, and to respond honestly to council member questions?
Yes.
Thank you.
Councilmember, thank you for the question.
Yep.
So about the 485X portfolio and what we've seen so far. So the state passed the legislation in April of 2024, and we put in place the rules for the program in January of 2025. And that allowed projects to start applying to the program. We have received, so there's 2 different parts for the program. So there's a registration process, And there's also a workbook process and an application process. So the registrations come into HPD within 6 months of starting construction, and then there was also a period of time where projects could submit registrations when they had already started construction. So to date, we have approximately 150 buildings that have submitted registrations, and that registration data is public, and I think we are anticipating to update that approximately twice a year, so we will have rolling data for that available. In addition to that, in terms of workbooks, we've received approximately 100 workbooks that are under review for projects. There's approximately 250 units that are currently in marketing. And we have started, as of this fall, approving benefits for the first projects under 45X. And apologies that because that number changes so frequently right now, I don't know that I have the exact number of benefits that have been granted.
So how long have these applications been open?
It's the beginning of this fiscal.
Yeah, beginning of this calendar year. We provided the application materials and the rules in January.
Okay, and is there a plan, or have we conducted a cost-benefit analysis to measure how much affordability the city will receive for each dollar of foregone tax revenue?
So maybe Lucy can step in here too, but we, ultimately the state legislature was involved in the final shaping of it, but HPD did a lot of analysis during the discussions at the state level. So we know that the benefit that we're providing is achieving overall the affordability goals that are outlined in the legislation. But Lucy can talk more specifically about that.
Yeah, what we would say is on a purely financial basis, new construction tax incentives like the 421A program, now the 485X program, can provide a very efficient use of city dollars for getting affordable housing, particularly in neighborhoods where we don't usually get it. Many of you are very used to hearing me come up and talk about those benefits and the importance of us building in all neighborhoods across the city. And so 485X is one of the ways that we do that. We also, in moving from the old program to the new program, will now have deeper levels of affordability that increases the benefit to the city overall as well, and is an improvement on the earlier program. Obviously, the new program also has a number of less tangible benefits, but there are things like labor participation requirements, et cetera. And so there are a number of ways where we assess the value of these programs, but overall we do believe this is a really beneficial program to the city, and the cost benefit is worth it for us, especially when we're thinking about the affordability that we get in neighborhoods where we might not otherwise get it.
So I guess in layman's terms, how do you consider if something is, how do you measure if we're getting a good bang for our buck?
I actually am sort of a layman here. I am not a finance person, but oversee the teams that do this work. But we look at the cost of what we're spending, and we compare that to the benefits that we're getting that can be measured in terms of the affordability.
Right, no, I understand, but what signifies a success there? What signifies that the tax break is worth it? How do you measure that?
Yeah.
I think the simplest way to measure it is that the program is being used and we are creating the affordability, right? If the restrictions were too much compared to the benefit, you would not see people using the program. We want people to use the program, so that's success number one. And we are seeing some good initial uptake, so we do believe that the program is helping create affordable housing and new housing supply in New York City. And the second is that we're getting the affordability that is outlined in the program, right?
Right. So we would not, these are all new affordable homes and affordable housing that we wouldn't otherwise get. Yeah. If those buildings were built but without 485X, they would not have affordability. they might not even be rentals, right? They're more likely to be condos or co-ops or some other form of housing. So one of the ways we would look at it is that the buildings are getting built, and that we are getting types of housing that we might not otherwise get in neighborhoods we would not otherwise get it.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the mixed income programs are achieving a couple things, right? We are getting new housing created in New York City, and we are getting new affordable housing created in New York City. I think I just saw for the first 3 quarters of this year, we had some of the highest new housing completions in many, 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 many years. And that is a result in large degree of some of the regulatory changes, include those approved by City Council, but also as a result of the property tax incentives that we are offering to facilitate new affordable housing construction in New York City.
Okay, I want to ask some questions about Mitchell-Lama. The resolutions fixing the value of tax exemptions for Mitchell-Lama developments predate online record keeping. I think most of these resolutions were adopted by the Board of Estimate, which was abolished back in 1990. So the resolutions can be difficult to track down without knowing the specific date on which they were granted. So how does the administration maintain a record or file of the Board of Estimate resolutions that grant the Mitchell-Lama exemptions?
Yeah, so we have copies of all of the original resolutions.
Okay. And how is the administration, if you need backups, Gail has them. How is the administration tracking this information to ensure that the tax bills are prepared accurately?
So just maybe we can step back a second. So last session, I think the budget negotiations at the state level, there was a new change to the Mitchell-Lama tax exemption that was authorized at the state level that reduced the property tax burden from having a 10% shelter rent tax to a 5% shelter rent tax. That is basically as of right for all Mitchell-Lama properties now. It does not require local authorizing legislation any longer. And as long as the properties remain Article 2, incorporated as Article 2 companies, and they submit the information we need in order to process the benefits, they will get those benefits. It is basically as of right. And so we have, maybe just to take that one step further, a team in asset management has been basically collecting financial information from the city Mitchell-Lamas over the last few months. We have completed our review of the shelter rent tax calculations, and we have submitted the information to the Department of Finance to process. I believe processing has started, but when the individual property sees the benefit depends on how often they are seeing their bills being billed, basically. Is it quarterly or semi-annually? Many of them are not going to actually see that until the early next calendar year, but the benefit is retroactive to July 1st of this year. And then we are also in the process of working with the state. HCR is the supervising agency for approximately half of the Mitchell-Lamas in New York City. They are doing the preliminary calculation based on information they're collecting from those properties and submitting to us for review. And then once we reviewed and processed, we will submit to Department of Finance as well.
I'll just add that we reach out to property owners, including on the Mitchell-Lama basis, not just in the process of adapting to the new changes, but on a very regular basis to continue to ensure that we have these numbers correctly, and then we work with the Department of Finance on that.
But couldn't the value be more than the new cap? Is that the case for any of the properties?
It is possible. Historically, some Mitchell-Lamas have also applied for J51, and they are eligible under the program. So it is possible that some of them have both a shelter rent tax benefit, so their taxes is based on 5% of their shelter rents, and also have a J51 that reduces their tax liability during the term of the J51 benefit. I don't have the number of properties today that will have the deeper benefit due to J51, but we could follow up with you if you're interested in that.
How many, do you have an idea of how many of the Mitchell-Lama properties that were granted the exemptions by the Board of Estimates still have the fullest exemption authorized under state law?
All of the properties now have 5% unless they have layered benefits because they qualify for another, with J51 specifically. They should all have 5% at this point. And again, it's retroactive to July, so some of those are still being processed by the agencies.
So is the administration doing or coordinating with Mitchell-Lama Properties to ensure that they're aware of the value of the exemption granted and the difference between the value and the new tax cap?
Yeah, so HPD sent out emails to accountants, attorneys, managing agents, board presidents when the change happened in the state law. And we have, for New York City supervised Mitchell-Lamas, we have received all the information we need at this point and have submitted the new tax calculations to the Department of Finance. And like I said, we're working with the state on the state supervised. So we feel confident that the Mitchell-Lama properties are aware of the change and taking advantage of it.
And what's the current process to determine the local tax liability for Mitchell-Lama co-ops and rentals?
So it's a shelter rent tax calculation. We have to get financial information, revenue, expense information from the property in order to calculate what 5% of the shelter rents would be. It's basically rents less particular expenses.
And do you have all the resources you need to prepare accurate tax bills in a timely manner?
We've had a team in place that has done this for Mitchell-Lamas for many years, along with some of the other tax exemptions are either gross rent or shelter rent tax calculations as well. This is a one-time change where it's going from 10 to 5, and so there's there's kind of a one-time process of recalculating at 5% and setting that up. But we've had the staff in place, and we feel pretty confident we can manage going forward.
Okay. I mean, I guess there's a concern that the resolutions could in fact give them an exemption that's lower than the burden below the cap.
If there are specific properties where you've heard that, you have other information, I think I'd be happy to take that back to our folks at the agency and take a closer look.
Okay. I want to stay on the. I want to stay on this, but for most property taxpayers, the council and the public are able to see the amounts charged and collected in the data listed on open data in the online, the PTS system. But we understand that DOF codes shelter rent payments as a generic charge code, which also includes other types of charges beyond the shelter rent payments. Can DOF provide greater clarity on what the various shelter rent charges are by property and the collection of those charges?
Yeah, so we are working to separate the shelter rent residential charge and the commercial charge. Previously to our new system, they were identified separately.
Okay.
And we are working to do that, and we hope to have that done soon.
Okay, I don't want to take up too much more. I want to hand it over to my colleagues, but I had another question here. The application process for co-op and condo abatement requires that the owner of a unit to provide their information to the board and the managing agent. The board or the managing agent in turn compiles all those applications into a single application for DOF. We've heard cases where owners claim they've submitted applications to the management company, but then they never receive the abatement. So what should an owner do in this case? What's the best recourse?
Well, typically, the managing agents are responsible for providing initial applications and renewal applications to the Department of Finance. So if there is an issue regarding application for the benefit, an applicant needs to, or the unit owners need to speak to the boards or to the managing agents to assure that their information has been properly submitted to the department.
But if a managing agent made a mistake or they forgot to include an owner's application, how can the individual owners still receive the benefits?
Well, they have to provide the information to the managing agent, who would then update us with that information so that we can properly reflect it in our records, in our database.
So what would it take to remove the interim step of including the managing agent and just allowing the co-op and condo owners to apply directly to DOF?
That's a requirement by law right now, so managing agents are required to file on behalf of the applicant.
Okay, so in order to get rid of that middleman, we'd have to change the law.
Correct.
Okay. Okay, I have I have a million, but one last one for now. There was a report released today that looked at DOF's estimates of income and expenses of affordable housing run by community development corporations. It found that more than a fifth are in financial distress, meaning they generate less revenue than their operating costs. DOF collects on an annual basis the income and expenses of almost all income-producing properties with 10 or more units in the city. So how does DOF work with HPD to leverage this data to improve our ability to address these ongoing housing issues?
Okay. This is one of the biggest, I think, issues, concerns, kind of initiatives that we are working on right now. The rapid escalation of operating costs over the last couple of years has really created some challenges for a number of owners of revenue-restricted properties. So that could be Mitchell-Lamas, it could be rent-stabilized housing, HDFC cooperatives, and we've been working very closely with some of our partners that work with, especially a number of the nonprofit organizations, but it's not just the nonprofit organizations right now that have raised these concerns, to identify whether there are ways that we can help or we can assess what's happening on the revenue side. They are revenue restricted properties, but we know that a number of properties have struggled with collections. Could we look at what other processes could we look at there to make sure that they are able to, maximize the revenue within the affordability restrictions of the property. We also have looked really closely at expenses. We mentioned briefly insurance. Insurance, utilities, and property taxes used to be the two biggest costs. Insurance has now crept up there, basically is being a bigger cost than utility costs at properties. And so we have been working with various agencies in the state to think about what is happening there and if there's anything that we can do to be helpful. As we mentioned, one of the biggest tools we have is within HPD's toolbox directly is to look at the property tax liability of the property. And so for properties that don't have a full property tax exemption today, and they are affordable properties, or they're willing to commit to be affordable properties going forward, we are willing to help them through a property tax benefit. And those programs are available. We're happy to have that conversation. If City Council knows of owners that are struggling, we're happy to take those referrals. Unfortunately, there also are a set of properties that have full property tax benefits today and are also struggling. And we have actually, within the agency, under Carrie's team, set up a group that is specifically working with some of the owners that are really struggling to cover their expenses, even with the full property tax benefit. We have seen some properties that are now experiencing foreclosure with a lender and have operating costs that they really cannot cover. And so we are actively doing workouts on a number of properties and trying to develop some new solutions that could help address those issues, particularly for the HPD regulated asset managed stock.
Last question from me for now. How much of your budget, and do you have the resources you need to really do proactive outreach to make sure that all of these, because oftentimes I think the city needs to be more like Old Navy when they have a sale where they won't shut up about it. And sometimes I worry that what we're doing is there's a big bag of money sitting on the table that says this is for distressed homeowners or, distressed property owners, but you got to know that it's sitting there. How much, and do you have the resources you need to be, do you think you could do more to let folks know about all these programs that do exist and are funded?
We absolutely could do more. I mean, we have really struggled with staffing and preservation, and that has happened at a time when there's been really rapid escalation of operating costs. We've made incredible progress over the last 2 to 3 years in restaffing Carrie's division. At one point in late 2021, early 22, I think we had 100% turnover of nearly every part of the transactional teams. The vacancy rate was something like 2/3, 75% within the transactional part of her division, even though the overall vacancy was not that high. Now I think it's closer to 10%. It's much more normal. We're not quite 100% staffed. But we are working through that. And we do have an exemption from the hiring restrictions that exist in other parts of the agency in order to make sure we can staff. We've also been trying to use other ways to move that pipeline. We do still have a backlog, and that's one of the biggest challenges with, I think, doing the more proactive outreach that we would love to be able to do. We still have a couple hundred properties in the backlog. We're still prioritizing based on the most urgent needs that owners are identifying to us. And so we have to work through that first before we can really go much more robust on the outreach, because otherwise owners will be waiting a while, and that's not good for anybody.
If you have an opening at HPD and I apply, I get the job, how long until I can start? How long until you get approved?
That's a good question. I don't know that I know that
Is it like
offhand.
6 weeks or 6 months?
It's longer than 6 weeks.
So it's 6 months.
It can take a while. I mean, the Office of Development is exempt. All of the financing positions are exempt from the 2-to-1 requirement. And
Right, I get it.
we've been able to move a little bit faster.
But it's not exempt if then it takes 6-7 months to onboard somebody.
We still need the budgeted headcount in order to process positions. And so it takes a while.
I can't help but not talk about your Old Navy example. Kim and I will talk to anyone and everyone literally about J51, which is an as-of-right program. So some of these things are different, and we all know that, as probably all of you know, our commissioner also will talk to anyone and everyone about these benefits and is doing everything we possibly can. So on the J51 side, for example, that is somewhere where we really made a push. We could use more help, and one of the challenges that we've seen is that because of the timeline, there are a lot of folks who are interested, but even if they start their planning today, they won't meet the timeline, and there is concern that there'll be another lapse. So we have heard that to be an obstacle, but that is a place where the as-of-right benefits can be really helpful for the things that you're talking about. That is an area where if buildings do the work and they meet the requirements, they can get those benefits. And so we really want to make sure we're doing everything we can to make sure people know about the availability of the program and the need to renew it, and could really benefit from continued partnership with the council.
Yeah. I mean, what we've seen with this administration, unfortunately, is they starve, it's not just with HPD, it's across the board. They starve the outreach arm of these agencies, and then they're able to point to programs and say, well, it's not working. Well, it's not working because no one knows about it, no one's taking advantage of it. So that's a dilemma. Okay, I want to acknowledge we were joined by council members Dinowitz, Aviles, and Deputy Speaker Ayala, and now I'm going to turn it over to Ressler, followed by Brewer for questions. Thanks, guys.
You sure you don't want to ask one more? I think he said last one 4 or 5 times, in case anyone was counting. But to be fair, so did Chair Sanchez, and it's because you guys came up with such an important topic, and I really want to commend you for holding this hearing today and asking such thoughtful questions. I'm just messing with friends. I do want to just continue from one of the areas where Chair Brannon left off on hiring. Deputy Commissioner Darga, approximately how many people report into you at HPD, kind of within your portfolio, broad strokes?
somewhere around 325 people.
So healthy number. How many new hires have you added this month, last 3 months?
I don't have that, but we have actually brought on a number of people over the last couple months.
I've heard reports from HBD of like 1 or 2 PARs approved
It's
over
been
the
more the last couple
course.
months.
Okay.
And let me explain. There are some initiatives where we have, as part of the City of Yes discussions, we strategically added support. So for example.
Just for the record,
for
the City
Chief-
Council advocated for your support.
We are
pushed
grateful.
that was one
Yes.
of our demands in passing City of Yes. That was not something that this administration wanted to do.
We're very grateful for that.
I just want to be clear on why that
Yes.
happened and where that advocacy came from, especially thanks to the leadership of Chair Sanchez in particular. So, but that's good to hear that our advocacy is yielding some results in terms of staffing at HPD, because we understand, as Chair Brandon and Chair Sanchez have noted, that if you all don't have the staffing and resources, then good things can't happen. And I'm grateful for the resources that are being spent to build new affordable housing and preserve affordable housing. You did mention earlier that, you know, the large number of units that were coming online this year, you thought was a result of new tax incentives, and that the right regulatory regime was in, you know, an improved regulatory regime was in place. And I just wondered, you know, we've highlighted in my district in downtown Brooklyn, 3,700 new units of housing came online in the first 6 months of this year. But I thought much of that was old 421A units that like got their foundations in and were just completing now and coming online. That wasn't actually a reflection of the new regulatory dynamics. It was the old regulatory dynamics of people racing to get in before that expiration. Am I misunderstanding?
No, I think that's right. I think that we are starting to see the impact of the City of Yes zoning changes. We have actually approved the first projects under the Universal Affordability Program. We also have, as Tricia mentioned a few minutes ago, we have started to approve applications under 45X.
Good.
Those
That's where I wanted
have to
to
be
go next.
completed projects to qualify, but the vast majority of the completions so far are under 421A 16.
Right. So the Assistant Commissioner, I think, mentioned in response to questioning that it was about 150 buildings, give or take, have been registered under 485X. There's been a lot of hand-wringing and anxiety among developers in districts like mine on the waterfront in Brooklyn, where there are questions about whether the math works on 485X and they'll be able to construct, well, they'll be able to afford to build new construction in those areas. In fact, we're seeing developers threaten that they're going to break down projects to do 2 buildings of less than 150 units on their site to get around the wage requirements in 485X, or just build smaller projects altogether. Can we just understand a little bit more in the data that you're seeing so far? Are we seeing new construction approved in the areas with the elevated wage ranges? And then just broadly for you both, for Kim and Lucy both, could you just speak to what you're seeing in the trends? Are you concerned about this? Do you think that this is a little bit of hand-wringing and developers are, trying to bargain for better terms, but that ultimately we have a good deal in place and that it should work?
Yeah. So I think that is a very good question. It's still pretty early. I don't have the breakdown of building size with me today, but we are releasing the registration data. And so
when you do release that data, will it be obvious which areas are subject to the higher wage limits and which aren't? Or is that something that you could provide to us?
I think we have been releasing it by project size.
Right.
And the wage requirements kick in depending on the project size primarily, but also there's
Geographic
some
too,
geographic
right.
implications. So I think it's a little early to tell. We have the initial registration data did indicate that there was overwhelming demand for small multifamily housing. It's unclear whether or not that is because the initial applications and registrations were for projects that had already basically started before the new program existed, meaning they were in construction, they were already moving, and they saw the new program and said, I'm going to take advantage of this, right? I'm willing to do the affordability. I have a building already, moving through the process. I think it's only now that we're going to start seeing, because the City of Yes changes that were enacted late last year, And
But
we're
as you
only now
noted,
going to start seeing whether
you
or not.
provided a lot of technical assistance and guidance to the state legislature. HPD always brings helpful data and analysis that informs, our decision-making and the state legislature's decision-making. Do you think that we have a good framework in place? Do you think it needs to be revisited?
So I think,
Go ahead.
what I'll say is we've looked at these trends with any new program, and it absolutely takes time to see owners change course, propose buildings that match the new requirements. That's the combination of the new tax incentives and City of Yes, and that we see those delays most significantly on the biggest projects. They are the clunkiest and sort of like slowest to get moving in with the change. So we absolutely expect that the new program will require people to make different development decisions, but we're still confident that this is a program that people will use, that we will see trends over time, that there will be more small buildings, because that's always how this program has been. We get a ton of homes from a few really big ones, and then just a ton of small buildings participating, and then that delay, which we see impact the bigger buildings overall. We will need, it is too soon to say exactly how buildings will adapt, and it is a 10-year program, and we're in an unusual financing environment currently. So I think what we would say is we are still confident that we are going to get a number of buildings built that wouldn't otherwise have been built, deeper affordability in parts of the city where we wouldn't get it, and then exactly how those numbers break out and how it compares to programs of the past, I think we are going to have to wait a little longer to see, just based on how this always seems to happen, the timeline when we introduce new programs and incentives.
Are there critical upcoming benchmarks, milestones, data points that you're looking for that we should collectively be looking for?
I think we need to look at the registration data, the next rounds of registration data. Like I said, the early.
When is that next round of registration data going to be released? You said twice annually?
Yeah.
So
I think we're.
sometime later this year?
Yeah. Yeah.
Before the end of the year?
Yeah.
And you can share with us a kind of breakdown by geography and size that gives us insight into if this is having negative impacts in the areas where we want to see the greatest density.
We definitely break it down by size. We'll have to see if we've broken down by geography and what that would take. But the building location information there's some cleanup because people use different classification. But yes, I hear your question, and we will.
And we plan to look at this closely, so we do
I want to
look
stay in
forward to
conversation.
about it.
I have to say, like, in a district like mine, we've got 24 train stations. It's super transit rich. It's appropriate for density. We want to make sure that big projects are happening. I'm seeing projects that are a 15-minute walk from the G train, renting 3-bedroom apartments for $10,000 a month. Like, rents have gone so insanely have spiraled so insanely out of control, I don't even know what to do with it. But it's just hard for me to understand how a developer can't pay decent wages when they're making $10,000 a month on a 3-bedroom. Like, it just doesn't, it does not make any sense to me at all. So I really do want to see this data. I'd like to be able to push back on these arguments more effectively, but could use some help in doing so that we can make this program work and maximize the housing supply, that we all, help address the housing supply issues. Thank you, Chair Sanchez, for the extra time.
Thank you, Councilmember Ressler. Now I'd like to turn it to Councilmember Brewer.
Thank you very much. I just had when you mentioned the 2019 law, which I love, and you talked about big issues. Oh, how do you deal with this warehousing? Because, the private owners, maybe they have a case, I don't know. I can't renovate because I can't get market rate, so therefore I can't renovate, so therefore I'm going to keep it vacant. What are we going to do about that? I don't know how many units are involved. I hear huge numbers. I don't know. Yeah. But that's an example of big thinking, and I don't know how to address it. Maybe you thought about it.
Yeah, that's a really big question. We over the last couple of years, we've heard this concern. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Lucy Jaffe, who oversees our research team and has, I think, a very good understanding, based on the data we've seen, what is happening in terms of vacancy. Would say that we have put some programs out to try to, offer options for owners that do have vacancy where there's lower rent. So, for example, we launched Unlocking Doors a little over a year ago. We did a modification recently to change the amount that we would offer for renovations. For that program, an owner that's had a vacancy for a period of time, I think it's about 2 years, and has lower rents, if they are need help with renovations in order to house a family, and it would be a family coming through the shelter system, we will offer basically to help fund the renovations of the unit. And we've seen very little uptake of that program, so it's unclear, and Lucy can talk about the data in a second, it's unclear how much there's a real issue there or a perceived issue. We're very interested in continuing the conversation, so if there are owners that have vacancy and they need help, they should reach out to us in our preservation programs. But we aren't seeing uptake around that program specifically.
They
So
probably don't want a shelter family.
Well, so they're, right,
I'm just being honest, and that's wrong, but that's how they think, because I know how they think.
yeah, that could be an issue. Maybe
Right.
Lucy can talk about the data.
yeah, I think partly what the issue is, what we're talking about is scale, right? So we do trust the New York City Housing and Vacancy Survey as the only representative data source on this front. The last time we did it was 23. What we saw was, as you've heard us talk about, and actually as the chair mentioned in her testimony, not only really low vacancy rates, but the lowest at the lowest rents. And that makes sense because there is such high demand at the lowest rent levels, and actually vacancy increases at the higher rent levels. In particular, what we see is that long-term vacancy, right? You need to have some vacancy. Someone has to move out. There might need to be, yes, there's some period of time, which that's healthy. So what's really important when we're having this discussion about to what extent are owners holding units that could be rented off the market is that long-term vacancy question. And we're really not seeing very much of it.
On the low end.
At the low end.
No, at the high end it exists, though, at the higher end.
Sure, because when you get to $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, there's just the demand is not quite as high, and so you might see some of that. That is, those are two very different problems to discuss and diagnose. And it doesn't mean that if people are walking around their neighborhoods and see a building or a block with concentrated amounts of vacancy, that we're saying that that's not true. It might be. This is a city of 3.6 million homes, but so when we're often talking about what are sort of the interventions at scale that we need, and that's why we do have some programs where we're saying, okay, there are going to be owners who are in an outlier situation where they are having trouble for whatever reason, and there are more vacant long-term units in their building. How do we reach out to them and bring them into the fold? HPD we don't have the ability to say you have to rent this unit if it's not otherwise regulated.
You have to do a carrot stick situation.
That is the approach that we're taking. We agree with you that this is, especially in the environment that we're in, something that requires big thinking and something that we are really.
I agree, and the public is confused.
Yeah.
I hear 6,000, 20, I don't know, 10,000, I have no idea. But when you hear those numbers, you go, oh my goodness.
Right. And,
All right, so.
and we're in an age where people aren't always trusting of data that we're providing, and we also really get that. Okay. We will be back in the field for the next New York City Housing and Vacancy Survey next spring, starting in January, sorry, not spring. And so we'll have new data coming from that as well, and that's also going to be a really important benchmark for us all to continue to monitor.
Okay, second question. I know you mentioned there are 5 programs. I'll be quick, but and that includes the vouchers, or is that a separate program? In other words, trying to think of how to get every unit to be as low rental as possible. And the reason I say that is because everybody's, I read all the newspapers, I look at Housing Connect, blah, blah, blah. It's not low. So are the housing vouchers included in the 5 programs that you listed?
Yeah, so there may be 5 main forms of financial assistance. Maybe the way to describe this, right? We have our budget, capital budget.
Right.
That helps us provide low-cost loans. We have property tax exemptions.
Correct.
Definitely the largest impact in terms of scale. Okay. We have low-income housing tax credits, and then we have rental assistance, and that could be tenant or project-based.
Right.
And it could be either, FEPS,
yeah.
it could be Section 8,
Okay.
it could be 1515.
Yep.
And then we have the zoning incentives. So the rental assistance is incredibly impactful for depth of affordability.
It is.
So our
That's why I was
senior
asking about it.
housing,
Yes.
right, where we know that vast majority of older adults in New York City are extremely low income.
13,000 is what you get with your Social Security.
Yeah, so that's where we really try to prioritize the rental assistance. You know, this is one area where we are, you know, just watching what happens at the federal level in terms of budget and authorization very closely, because there are projects or programs that we administer that are very dependent on having rental assistance to provide meaningful affordability.
The other quick issue is I'm stuck with ABC and Extell, biggest 2.4 acres. In order to get Manhattan, because everybody hates to do affordable housing in the borough of Manhattan. They just don't, you want to go to the Bronx, you want to go to Brooklyn. So how would be an example, could all 5 programs be used in one non-zoning, non-MIH, dependent on the owner, kind of like HPD, CPC? It's a nightmare.
Yeah.
Is that something that could subsidize?
Yeah, so we actually.
This is quite a hell that I'm dealing with.
Yeah, one of the biggest challenges in a lot of Manhattan and some parts of in the rest of the city as well is that the cost of land is extremely expensive.
Very.
Right, and so we actually modified our new construction term sheets that we released this last summer, where we will allow a higher subsidy. We still have to be reasonable, right? But a higher subsidy where the higher cost is driven by acquisition in limited affordability areas. So in markets where we are not seeing the market actually provide affordable options for the typical rental household, that's where we would prioritize providing additional support.
Okay, I would hope you would do it at this location. And I'm just telling you, it is a situation, we have the best schools, and you have the expensive land, but I need help. And I don't usually bring up my projects, but this is the biggest piece of land available in almost in Manhattan.
We're happy to keep talking about that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Brewer. Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. Okay, so picking back up, just one more question on Article 11's. Actually, not a question on Article 11's. Just to give us the context, how many HDFC co-ops specifically have applied for Article 11 abatements during this administration, and has HPD granted? How many of those are still in the pipeline for consideration? And I'll keep it there.
Okay, so there are a very significant number, there are about 1,200 HDFC co-ops in New York City. Most of them have a partial or full residential tax exemption through Article 11. Sometimes it's known as the DAMP exemption. That's common language around it, but it's actually an Article 11 exemption. We have been providing assistance. We have a very robust pipeline of HDFC co-ops that are seeking assistance through Carrie's team. And we actually changed the organization of the division in order to better work with those property owners. What we found is that, you know, working with an HDFC co-op where it's a board of residents that are not like living all day long financing affordable housing, they need additional help to understand how to successfully navigate the process. And so we specifically set up a team that is focused on HDFC co-ops, the Mitchell-Lama co-ops, and making sure that we can adequately support them. We do have a lot of co-ops in the pipeline right now. I don't have those numbers with me today, as well as how many we've been serving, but we can definitely follow up with that. And just to note, we do know that there is, many of them have an exemption that is expiring in a few years, and so we are starting to think about what that means to extend that to make sure they continue to have support to provide meaningful affordability.
I feel seen. That was my next question. Thank you. Okay, so as of now, there is no plan for these
We
plans?
are talking with UHAB. There's some ideas about whether or not it would be a kind of a state program, or we would work through an Article 11. We don't have a specific proposal yet, but we are actively thinking about it, and we're happy to talk more.
Thank you. Okay.
How's mine? 615 West 150th Street. How are we doing with that one?
Oh, boy. I'm not prepared today to answer that, but I will,
That's
I can.
Louise's building, Palente's
Yes.
building.
Yes.
I got $8 million sitting there for it. It hasn't moved.
Okay, I'm happy to follow up with you to give you an update.
Great. Thank you, Councilmember Brewer. Switching gears to J51, since the council's reauthorization earlier this year, no, the baby hadn't been born yet, so it had to be last year. How many buildings have applied to J51 since we reauthorized with Local Law 122?
So I can cover initially, and then if there's some follow-ups, maybe Tricia, you can help fill in. I believe that we've had 95 applications so far to the program. There was a lot initially, and it's slowed down since then.
Yes.
The vast majority are co-op and condo buildings, and yeah.
Yeah, that's correct. So the authorization was in December of 2024, and we were able to put together the applications in January. There were 4 months where projects that had already completed work were able to submit to receive the abatement, and the vast majority of the 95 submitted within those first 4 months. I think, as previously mentioned, there is a concern for projects that are trying to take advantage of this new program that they need to complete the work within 30 months. And I mean, as of now, that's less than 9 months away for June 30th, 2026.
Yeah, we've heard that at this point in time that it's, if somebody's doing a really discrete, smaller system, they may be able to complete the work still in time to take advantage of it. But there were a number of applicants that we talked to, when, like late last year, early this year, that could have taken advantage of J51 and didn't think they had enough time to complete the work and know that they would be able to qualify for the benefit. So the reauthorization is a huge, huge priority for us. The inconsistent, availability of the program over the last decade, I think, has really been unfortunate at a time where we know now, owners are struggling with operating costs, being able to finance renovations, interest rates are higher, right? Having a program like J51 is really, really, really important.
Thank you.
All those things, and that we didn't have it over the last couple of years, a time period where I think a lot of buildings would have used it to remain stable and keep up. So we're very mindful of that, including as we think about the time period for the J51 reauthorization, that length of time that we're seeing that impact now.
So before the reauthorization, during the hearings, we heard a lot of concerns that the former version of the program was structured in a way that didn't really it wasn't useful for many owners. I'm curious if you've had feedback already from the 95 applicants or others regarding how we ended up structuring the program and what costs are eligible.
Yeah, I'll turn it over to Tricia.
Great, thank you. One of the primary concerns that was raised was about the costs, the certified reasonable cost schedule. One of the challenges with the old version of the program was that certified reasonable cost schedule had to be updated through the rulemaking process, and so that took considerable amount of time to be able to provide updates. And so the costs got outdated over time, and one of the major changes to this new version of the program is the way that we update that cost schedule. So that cost schedule is now updated by HPD and posted on our website in a way that is a lot more dynamic and able to reflect really the current costs and market costs of work.
And that if we have the program over a longer period of time, then we'll start to really see those benefits of the ability to keep pace. And I think that's really important in terms of as we think about reauthorization and a longer time frame.
So on the question of reauthorization, what is the status of your conversation with our partners in the state? What additional reforms, if any, are being called for? And what are you hearing about the prospect of J51 reauthorization being considered next session?
So it is a state program, as you mentioned. I think we've been Old Navying. We will tell anyone we can that we think J51 is one of the most important tools. I think our partners at the state level, they are quite aware that we are seeking reauthorization and looking for really that quick extension that will give people the confidence that they don't currently have, that they can start a project now and know that J51 will be there on the other end. And that's that change that we've had given sort of what's happened over the last couple of years. So that's absolutely our priority and where we're focused on getting that extension and that longer term extension.
Okay, let me know who to call when.
We will.
I know. A quick follow-up on Mitchell-Lamas and J51. How many Mitchell-Lamas are also taking advantage of J51?
I don't have that today, but I do know that some have done that historically.
And I would also say in some of our combined work, that has been where some of the impacts are biggest because the scopes of work in the Mitchell-Lama portfolio are bigger, so they have not been able to, we have seen had recent conversations where a Mitchell-Lama would be a great candidate, and it's not realistic for the time frame right now.
Got it. Thank you. Moving over to UDAPs, can you first refresh the world on what UDAP exemptions are and how you determine what kinds of projects receive them?
Yeah, so the UDAP exemption authority is for residential properties that are undergoing renovation or new construction on formerly city-owned land. So when we convey a property, we can also ask for authorization to grant a tax exemption through the UDAP authority. It is, because it is a maximum term of 20 years, it is not as commonly used as the other exemption authorities. We are typically regulating property for more than 20 years, right? 30, 40, et cetera. So 420C by comparison is up to 60 years. Article 11 is up to 40 years. And so the other exemption authorities, if we're conveying property to be multifamily housing and affordable for a very long time, we want the exemption to be in place for a long period of time as well. It has, I think, been most commonly, can be used like smaller home ownership projects that don't easily qualify for another exemption. UDAP can actually be useful. But it is probably one of the least frequently used exemption authorities more recently.
Thank you. And just popped into my head, how are 420Cs signed when they're accompanying LIHTC projects?
I'm sorry, say that again?
How are 420Cs sized when they're accompanying LIHTC?
Great. So the 420C is used for low-income housing tax credit projects, and our tax credit projects are overwhelmingly serving very low-income households, right? So in a traditional ELA project, the weighted average AMI is in the low 50% AMI range. With revenue at that level, we would expect the project to require a full tax exemption in order to operate successfully. We also see projects, occasional projects coming through our preservation programs that received low-income housing tax credits in the past. The affordability in those projects can vary a little bit more. So a traditional low-income housing tax credit project that has very low rents typically is getting a full exemption. We can also charge, we can size the benefit if there is more robust revenue so that there is a partial exemption. That is more common in projects that have, let's say, project-based Section 8, where they have really strong revenue. And we do a calculation internally to determine what the strength of the revenue and cash flow is and whether a partial tax exemption is warranted.
Got it. So the 420Cs aren't layered with Article 11s. It's just 420C for the value of the full exemption?
Wait, say that again. Sorry.
I will try. So 420Cs are not layered with Article 11s, for instance. They are valued
No,
at
they're,
the full
yeah,
value.
it's
of
one
the
or the
exemption.
other.
Got it. Thank you.
You can layer some exemptions, but not 420C with Article 11.
Thank you. I'd like to.
Yeah, I have one clarification to just take a walk with me here. So on the Mitchell-Lama shelter rent, so you said you believe that the state law set the shelter rent tax at 5%, right?
Yes.
Okay. So our staff believes that the change in law is a bit more complicated than that, and we just wanted to get some clarification. Prior to the change, the state law said that Mitchell-Lama could receive a tax break, but still had to pay a tax at a level no lower than 10% of shelter rate. In essence, it's a floor on how much a break could provide. But now we understand the law changed to say that the Mitchell-Lamas cannot be required to pay a tax greater than 5% of shelter rate, which would mean the tax paid for a Mitchell-Lama could be less than 5% of shelter rent. So does this not align with your assumption? Because you had mentioned that everyone has to pay a tax of 5%. Could you clarify your interpretation of that law?
Yeah, so I can certainly double check with our legal team and housing supervision team at HPD, but my understanding is that it authorized us to provide basically an as-of-right 5% shelter rent tax exemption. So I don't think we have authority to go below that through the state law.
So your
but I
interpretation
can
is that the
double-check
5% would be the floor?
That would be the floor on the benefit, yes.
Okay.
Unless it's being layered with another benefit authority. And there are some Mitchell-Lamas on ground leases where there may be other provisions that we could account for, right? It's a pilot, it's not actually a tax exemption.
Right, because some of our staff reviewed some of the old resolutions just for fun, and we found that some of them said that the tax break should be set at the lowest amount available under law, and under the old law, that would mean a tax of 10% of shelter rent. And also, you mentioned those resolutions. Can you share those resolutions with us?
I can follow up with our team. And I did just get a clarification. I think the law said that you can only go below 5% outside of New York City. So the vast majority of Mitchell-Lamas are in New York City,
Yeah,
but
right.
there are some outside.
Okay, I'll give it back to Chair Sanchez. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. For Department of Finance, thank you for sharing what changes have been made after the controller's audit that found that there were 720 abatements that were improperly granted of the cooperative and condo tax abatement program. Can you describe for us, generally speaking, what are the ways in which the Department of Finance audits its administration of different incentives? If you can share examples of, if you want to, talk about, say, the solar credit or others.
Well, for ones that we author the eligibility of, not-for-profit, ICAP, ICIP, the commercial expansion program and commercial revitalization program, all of those have a annual or biennial renewal by law. So that's one way that we do it. For solar, for 420C or any other programs, we'll generally do sort of internal audits of the programs, just going over if there are commercial percentages, for example, in the 420C or Article 11 programs, we'll make sure that that corresponds with the certificate of eligibility. Solar is, we don't really have too many problems with solar that I can think of. That's a pretty straightforward program. J51, I mean, it's, the calculation for the exemption of J51 is very complicated, so it's not something that we usually find out about these type of things when someone contacts us a lot of the time. But that's really our main, at least on the commercial exemption portion. So I know that there is for homeowner tax benefits, there are renewal requirements as well.
What is the conversation on the HPD areas where HPD is making the determination of eligibility, and of course DOF administers? What is the relationship in terms of ongoing oversight, especially for programs that have 60-year lifespans?
So if there's ever a D transfer, then for programs like Article 11 or 420C, Mitchell-Lama, any of the shelter rent programs, we would contact HPD to determine if the property is still eligible. Our normal process is that becomes taxable after there is a change, not for shelter rent, but for the other programs. So we just want to verify that there wasn't a deed recording, which is sort of a name-only transfer. For 421A, of course.
Sorry, just a quick follow-up. So you're monitoring every deed transfer?
Yeah, it's an automatic process within the property tax system. If there's ever a deed transfer for specific types of exemptions, then it automatically triggers a restoration to the tax roll. I mean, for 421A, of course, there was an issue, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, in terms of with the old program where it required 2 different certificates of eligibility, and we worked very closely with HPD to ensure that all the properties that were receiving benefits had met the criteria. A number of them were suspended. The vast majority have come back into the program, have come into compliance. I mean, we work very closely in terms for shelter rent projects. In addition to the charges that are transmitted from HPD to DOF, which we implement, so shelter rent projects are fully exempt, and then there's a pilot charge, which is what shows up on the bill. We also compare the pilot charge against the full tax equivalent. Whichever is lower is what we use according to law. And then for the shelter rent projects which have a commercial portion, we verified that through square footages with our assessment group, and then we bill that portion as if it were taxable, and that would be the separate charge that Chair Brennan was talking about before.
Thank you. Do you want to add about your HPD's oversight? We talked a lot about Article 11s, but for other programs?
I mean, I think the only thing I would add, so I mentioned that there are some properties that have the shelter rent or gross rent tax calculation, right? So that is an ongoing evaluation. A lot of the other programs, we're issuing a certificate of eligibility that is then delivered to DOF, and DOF processes as described. There are some where we have to do an annual calculation, and then we send that calculation to Department of Finance.
Okay, so my last question is just bringing us to the present moment with the federal government shutdown. Can you share at HPD what is the impact of the federal government shutdown on HPD's ability to continue financing deals and creating and preserving affordable housing?
So I can cover broadly, and Lucy, feel free to jump in if I miss anything. You know, HPD's budget is I think you're aware, we rely heavily on federal funding. About 2/3 of our budget is from federal sources. A couple of the main programs that impact our funding are Section 8, the Community Development Block Grant Program, and then the Home Program. So we are certainly watching what happens in terms of authorization of those programs to see, whether we'll be able to sustain operations and continue the program support that we've been able to provide.
Does HPD, does HPD receive this funding on a, what cadence? Are we okay right now? Have we been, are we good for the year on the federal portion of HPD's budget?
So it depends on the funding source. The thing that we have had over the last few years, the occasion on many opportunities to have to prepare for the possibility of a shutdown. So we do know what it takes to prepare for this, and our priority is to avoid interruptions to our programming, particularly on the Section 8 front. Obviously, it is unclear how long this will go on, and it is in an environment of significant concerns, as we were alluding to, with just costs generally when even the shutdown ends. So I would say we are both managing the situation and working to ensure and protect against any interruptions, but it is a moment that we are in that impacts some of our thinking, our planning, and want to be very cautious and conservative to avoid any issues with our budget moving forward. Those interruptions can have major impacts for New Yorkers, for our ability to keep building, housing, all of our operations. So in that moment, you will see and hear from us a significant amount of concern about big new financial decisions in this kind of an environment, but we are following all of our steps to try to mitigate any near-term concerns.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for your participation and preparation and everything else for this hearing. I think this was a very productive discussion. I look forward to ongoing conversations. Thank you. Thank you so much. I want to just prepare IBO. You're up next. So we're going to hear from Sarah Parker at IBO, the Independent Budget Office, and then we'll open up for public comment.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. So Sarah, we just have to administer the oath, and then you can read your testimony.
Good afternoon. Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth before these committees and to respond honestly to council member questions?
I do.
You may begin.
On behalf of the Independent Budget Office, thank you for the opportunity to testify today on New York City's housing tax incentives. I am Sarah Parker, Senior Research and Strategy Officer. As you are very familiar with, the Independent Budget Office is a nonpartisan, independent New York City agency created to enhance public understanding of New York City's budget, public policy, and economy through independent analysis. Housing tax incentives, a form of spending through the tax code to encourage specific behaviors, are a central tool that the city uses to financially support new housing production, preservation, and affordability. Examples include exemptions, deductions, special credits, preferential tax rates, abatements, and deferrals of tax liability. Together, these are referred to as tax expenditures. Although tax expenditures do not appear as planned spending in the city's budget, they represent an intentional foregoing of revenue, making them a form of government spending. Because of this, the use of tax code-based tools merit the same level of scrutiny as direct spending in terms of what each dollar yields in terms of housing outcomes. And I'm very glad that we've already touched upon that today. IBO conducts studies on the efficiency and efficacy of tax break programs under Local Law 18 that was passed in 2017. We most recently conducted a study on the impact of the Industrial and Commercial Abatement Program, ICAP. In my testimony today, I will provide an overview of IBO's recent work on the important topic of housing tax incentives. And I'd also like to note that the written testimony contains links to IBO's reports on many of the topics I will be touching upon today. First, I'd like to cover some different types of housing tax incentives. The first area is to highlight as of right compared with discretionary tax incentives. Many property tax breaks are structured to be as of right programs. Any development that applies and meets the program's criteria on location, project type, and the amount of set-aside affordable housing, if that's required, is entitled to receive the tax break. There is no limit to the number of developments that can participate or how much the city forgoes in tax revenue. There is also no requirement to prove you need this tax break in order to make your project pencil out. As of right, tax breaks do add a level of unpredictability and volatility to the size of the tax expenditure in any given year. These contrast with discretionary tax breaks, where developments obtain approval from an agency or board that reviews the details of a proposed project. Often, discretionary tax breaks are evaluated and granted as part of broader economic development priorities. A central way that the city grants discretionary property tax breaks is through the negotiation of payments in lieu of taxes, or pilot agreements. Another discretionary option that is often granted by the city is the waiver of mortgage recording taxes. An example, the city granted such a waiver for the housing development planned at Willets Point. Next, I'd like to draw a distinction between exemptions and abatements. Oftentimes, these terms are used interchangeably, but they actually have an important influence on how the tax system works as a whole. The two main ways to reduce property taxes is through granting an abatement or an exemption. Property tax exemptions reduce the taxable value of the property that then the tax rate is applied. This lowers the tax liability and is similar to a deduction on income taxes. Abatements leave unchanged the taxable assessed values, but then lower the tax bill, like a tax credit on income taxes. Although a full property tax exemption and a full property tax abatement both result in a $0 tax liability for the benefiting property, the difference in how the discount is structured has ramifications for other property tax bills citywide. This is because state law assigns each of the 4 tax classes, which are based on types of properties, to represent a set percent of the total amount of tax liability for the fiscal year. I would also like to cover incentives that apply to developments compared with incentives that apply to individual households. Among housing tax incentives, some breaks benefit housing developments, while others are specific to individual units. Housing development tax incentives include 485X, J51, 420C, and the Division of Alternative Management Programs, to name a few. Development level tax benefits reduce the cost of operating for a building and are often granted to help finance income-restricted affordable units in the property. Many of the city's housing programs, including inclusionary housing, are predicated on the assumption that the property will have a discounted or no tax liability for a period of time that generally matches the length of the regulatory agreement. Many of the city's housing programs to finance affordable housing are built around existing tax abatement and exemption programs. Tax incentive benefits at the individual level include the co-op and condo partial tax abatement, the senior citizen and disabled homeowner exemptions, SCRE and DRE, and veteran and clergy exemptions as examples. And these provide tax breaks tied to specific apartment or house for people in specific demographics. And what's interesting about these is that some of these programs for individuals require the beneficiary household to income test, while others do not. I'm coming from a budget office, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the size of foregone revenue. In fiscal year 2025, the city collected $34.6 billion in real property taxes. That year, the city provided $8.1 billion in property tax discounts, and this is according to the Department of Finance annual report on tax expenditures. While some of these property tax breaks benefit commercial industrial properties, $4 billion in foregone tax revenue is tied specifically to 4 housing tax break programs created under state law. And I want to briefly discuss those 4 programs, all of which are as-of-right programs. As we've already mentioned in this hearing, we have the 421A 485X program, and this is the largest of the city's tax expenditures and totals nearly $2 billion in foregone revenue in 2025. The program provides a full property tax exemptions for newly constructed residential housing for up to 40 years. In 2025, the program provided exemptions to 40,803 residential properties, totaling 215,000 and change units. It has evolved over time to include requirements that a share of units be income restricted affordable housing. The current program outcome depends on a choice from a menu of options, which choices are made from a menu of options made by developers. According to application data for the new 485X program from June 2024 through April of 2025, no developer had yet selected into the 485X option with the most rental units and the deepest affordability requirements. That's option A. The next largest tax expenditure related to housing is, in fact, an exemption for the New York City Housing Authority. Under state law, it is fully exempt from direct taxation. And this is in perpetuity. The city can ask for a nominal pilot, which it did prior to fiscal year 2014. NYCHA's property tax exemption lowers its operating costs, and IBO has documented and reported quite extensively on NYCHA's budget challenges and also the new pressures it faces from the Trump administration. For Class 2 condo and co-op partial tax abatement, this provides a partial property tax break for owners totaling $695 million in reduced property taxes in 2025. This break, unlike some of the other ones that I've mentioned, is specifically intended to reduce the disparity in taxation between Class 1 homeowners of 1 to 3 unit houses compared with Class 2 homeowners of co-op condo units. So this tax incentive is specific to address a disparity within our tax code rather than an incentive to build or preserve housing more generally. The abatement is not tied to any affordability requirements or income restrictions and does not have a time limit. And then lastly, the 420C low-income housing program provides a property tax exemption for low-income affordable housing units financed through federal low-income housing tax credits. The property must be owned by a charitable or social welfare organization to qualify, and it operates under a Department of Housing Preservation and Development regulatory agreement. The exemption typically ends upon the expiration or termination of this agreement. And in 2025, 420C provided $479 million in tax breaks for 2,555 properties, totaling almost 97,000 units. If there is one central takeaway from this overview of housing tax incentives in New York City, they make a complex constellation of programs that apply both to developments and individuals, construction and preservation, renters, owners, market rate apartments, and income-restricted housing. Many of these programs were initially crafted decades ago and have evolved over time to meet changing housing conditions and markets. IBO monitors tax expenditure programs on an ongoing basis, focusing on the local impacts of new housing production, preservation, and affordability through a lens of fiscal responsibility. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much. I have a few questions. First, you emphasize that there's no limit on the number of developments that can participate in the as-of-right programs. Do you have a sense of how OMB budgets for uptake in as-of-right programs, as-of-right tax incentive programs?
I am not directly involved in their thinking, but generally one looks at how much participation there were in prior years and then uses the tools typical for forecasting of any piece of a budget to figure out, is there going to be a sudden rush to use this program, especially if something is about to expire? There generally is an uptick in applications. We saw that as previous versions of 421A were expiring, a large rush to get your application in, get your foundation started to qualify. And so you look at past trends and then try and figure out how that would translate to the future.
Thank you. Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. With respect to 485X, HPD testified earlier that the goals of the 485, the HPD was very involved in the shaping of 485X, and that they were confident that the affordability goals of the program would be met. But you just testified that no developers have selected option A, which requires the most rental units and the deepest affordability. Can you share, if you have this analysis, what option is being selected by developers and what affordability levels we should expect to see?
I don't have that prepared today, but I'd be happy to follow up with you.
Thank you. And then with respect to the co-op and condo abatement, you highlighted that these programs are not means tested, they're not income limited. Do you have a breakdown or an understanding of what percentage of co-op and condo abatements are going to housing types or co-op and condo types that are subsidized through different programs versus market rate? So how many are going to Michelamas, HTFCs, and this kind of housing versus not?
That is a great question, and you should request IBO to do a study on exactly that topic.
I have several requests that that you've inspired me to make, so that is forthcoming. All right. Well, thank you. That's really helpful testimony.
Thank you for your testimony. Has IBO conducted or planned any fiscal impact assessment for the city's revenues as a result of the new shelter rent tax?
We have not yet, but again, that's a great question to ask IBO to do. This is where we get ideas for research.
And could you talk a bit about, if you can, the anticipated housing affordability impacts from the state's imposition of a cap on Mitchell-Lama taxability?
One of the things that when we think about Mitchell-Lamas is both and affordable housing in general, is how do you keep prices lower? How do you keep the building to have enough cash flow to maintain operations, to maintain the physical building? And one of the central ways that New York City has decided to help buildings with lower income and income restrictions maintain and operate is to reduce property taxes. So that shift from 10% to 5% by definition will lower the property tax liability for these buildings, and presumably then they have more money to put into either keeping maintenance low or help maintenance costs for if it's a co-op, or help keep rental costs more affordable. And one of the interesting things about Mitchell-Lama is that while it was originally situated very much as a middle-class housing program, over the decades of the program's existence, the incomes of residents have not kept up as middle class. And so those are buildings that are particularly, the structure the program was built around assumed a level of income for these households that has not kept up. And that's something that makes it particularly of interest.
I appreciate the testimony around these tax breaks that are intended to reduce disparity in taxation, but it leads me back to my favorite subject of property tax reform. If we were to reform our property tax system and fix the disparity between new condos and rentals, wouldn't we be able to feasibly redesign 485X to be more efficient?
That is a very central question to all of the various tax abatements and exemptions that the city grants. Many of them are to correct for issues that the city has created elsewhere, whether it's in how its property taxes are structured or the ways that code and land use regulations add to the cost of development. There's lots of ways the city has, in some places, created rules that then we create a tax break to try and correct for, or counteract. And I think the more we can think about all of this in a holistic manner and at a citywide level, the better off it is for both the city in terms of its residents and for its financial situation.
And I assume IBO would agree with us that our broken property tax system is greatly impacting our ability to create and maintain affordable housing.
We're very much looking to what the court decides on property taxes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think I'm good. Thank you very much, as always. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we will now open the hearing for public testimony. I remind members of the public that this is a formal government proceeding and that decorum shall be observed at all times. As such, members of the public shall remain silent at all times. The witness table is reserved for people who wish to testify. No video recording or photography is allowed from the witness table. Further, members of the public may not present audio or video recordings as testimony, but may submit transcripts of such recordings to the Sergeant at Arms for inclusion in the hearing record. If you wish to speak at today's hearing, please fill out an appearance card with the Sergeant at Arms and wait to be recognized. When recognized, you will have 2 minutes to speak on today's hearing topic of housing tax incentives. If you have a written statement or additional written testimony you wish to submit for the record, please provide a copy of that testimony to the Sergeant at Arms. You may also email written testimony to testimony@council.nyc.gov within 72 hours of this hearing. Audio and video recordings will not be accepted. The first panel is Tabitha Ward, Christopher Leon Johnson.
My name is Tabitha Ward, and I live at 2612 Broadway in New York City, zip code 10025. And I wanted to bring to your attention the New York City Housing Preservation and Development Rehabilitation Loan and Property Tax Exemption application that Lantern Community Services and a REIT Management LLC is applying for. This is for an aging-in-place residential remodeling that they said that they're going to do. But I want to bring to your attention that the information that they placed on this loan, this rehabilitation loan and property tax application, is untrue. The kitchen package that they have said, it includes an in-unit language. This is not true. We do not have an in-unit kitchen. Also, the bathroom package also includes in-unit language. We do not have in-unit bathrooms. We have communal bathrooms. So I ask that the council ensure that the information is a little bit more correct and a little bit more accurate, I have emailed the information that I have here to include other documentations. I've emailed it to the Housing and Building Committee members, each member, and I ask that you ensure that the information is correct. This it reeks of a money grab. It seems like they're just trying to gather a little bit money to kind of survive the unfortunate federal shutdown. So I ask that you look into that and make sure that they're not putting in language that is not true and that is not accurate, and then they're unable to make those repairs or those remodeling or the rebuild, whatever it is that they're saying that they're going to do. They will not be able to do those things because we do not have in-unit kitchens, neither do we have in-unit bathrooms. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Chair Brannon and President Sanchez. My name is Christopher Johnson. I'm here to tell the Access City Council to really start looking into all these developers that exploit the 428 program while overcharging tenants, which they should be doing. I know that the controls over was here earlier, but they need to really go harder to where the city council need to go hard to where that if any developer or any property management company that takes any tax credits, including the 428 program, while breaking the law when it comes to overcharged tenants, especially rent stabilized tenants or tenants that's making less than 30% AMI, because the affordable housing laws, they are able to revoke that status and be able to pay back every dollar that they could have saved with 421A. And I'm calling on this council member, Justin Brannon, who will be our next OMB commissioner, OMB chair in the Madani administration, to really put these people in check. Because as OMB chair, and next year in the Madani administration, you have the authority to really do a lot of things to really put these developers in check when it comes to sending recommendations to the mayor's office and the city council that any developer, any property management company that exploits these tax break programs should have their statuses revoked and be able to pay back all the money that they should have owed to the city, plus damages to the city, and plus any fees that the tenants were paying to them. So I make this clear that, look, I support the resolutions when it comes to Mitchell Lama. I know it's a high voter turnout in the Mitchell Lama development, so I see what man is trying to do with this stuff. But it's all about protections, and make sure that what they do with NYCHA when it comes to demolition, they need to make sure that all Mitchell Lama developments does not be demolished and keep them public. So thank you so much and enjoy your day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Congratulations. We will now turn to remote testimony. Once your name is called, a member of our staff will unmute you and the Sergeant at Arms will give you the go-ahead to begin. Please wait for the sergeant to announce that you may begin before delivering your testimony. First up, Emily Goldstein, followed by Richard Sika and Robert Altman.
You may begin.
Unmuted? Great. Thank you so much for the opportunity to testify today. Good afternoon, and I apologize I wasn't able to make it in person. My name is Emily Goldstein, and I'm the Director of Organizing and Advocacy at ANHD. First and foremost, I want to emphasize the importance of preserving New York City's existing affordable housing stock. New construction often pulls more attention, but preservation is absolutely essential and must be a priority for affordable housing resources. As ANHD highlighted in a report we released today, our affordable housing stock is at serious risk. Our analysis found that at least 22% of the city's subsidized stock is already in financial distress, and the true numbers are likely much higher. Article 11 remains one of the city's most powerful tools for preserving affordable housing, especially for nonprofit developers. We suggest two improvements. One, help distressed buildings combining Article 11 with other HPD financing programs to move through the pipeline more quickly and get the resources they need. Two, lower the income restrictions in Article 11 buildings. We support income averaging models, but we believe that the current framework allowing up to a third of units to be at 100% or 65% of AMI needs to be revisited. I also want to highlight 420C as another effective tool for sustaining deeply affordable housing, particularly for nonprofit developers. Proposals to broaden eligibility of this program risk diverting its benefits to for-profit entities that do not deliver the same lasting community value. We encourage the council to support maintaining the program as specific to nonprofit stewardship. I don't want to take up too much time. Additional information will be included in our written testimony, including support for J51 renewal as a preservation tool for the broader unsubsidized rent stabilized stock, which is obviously also a critical component of New York City's affordable housing landscape, and happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you so much, Emily. Next up, we have Richard Sika.
You may begin.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Chair Sanchez and Chairman Brennan. My name is Richard Sika, and I'm Vice President of Galaxy General Contracting Corp. For the past 40 years, our Bronx-based company has been active in constructing and developing affordable housing in New York City. My testimony today will focus on the need to extend the current 421A benefits for buildings that are set to expire within the next 5 to 7 years. Once benefits expire, the buildings will pay full property taxes. However, if full property taxes are paid, these buildings will have deficits as their rental income will be insufficient to cover this increased expense along with steadily higher operating costs. Furthermore, it is unlikely that owners would be able to refinance their mortgages with property taxes that increase dramatically. Moreover, once 421A benefits expire, tenants lose their rent stabilization status as their apartments become market rent-based. To illustrate the effects of the expiration of 421A benefits, I would like to use 324 Pleasant Avenue, a 39-unit apartment building our company owns in Manhattan. The building was constructed in 2013 with a 421A tax abatement. In 2022, with the abatement still in place, the real estate taxes were $3,115 and the building's gross income was $911,000. In 2025, with the tax benefits unwinding, taxes increased to $191,000 with our building's gross income at $970,000. When the tax abatement expires in 2027, real estate taxes will be $350,000.
Thank you. However, your time has expired.
You may conclude. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I continue?
Yes, please.
Thank you. Thank you. Due to the current phasing out of tax benefits, the building is currently operating at a loss. The building's current average rent is $2,113. When the 421A benefits expire in 2027, the apartments will become deregulated and market rents can be charged. The average rent would have to increase $750 to $1,000 a month to account for the increase in real estate taxes. This will certainly cause tenant displacement, plus the loss of 39 rent-stabilized apartments. Multiplying this by the thousands of apartments losing their rent-stabilized status in the future will certainly exacerbate the city's current rental affordability crisis. I think it would be better public policy for the abatement to be extended for 35 years in exchange for owners executing a regulatory agreement that would maintain the apartment's current affordability and rent stabilization status. I believe this would benefit owners and tenants alike. I welcome the opportunity to meet with you to discuss this matter in greater detail. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Richard. That's a very helpful example that you shared. Next, I'd like to call Robert Altman.
You may begin.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon. I am Robert Altman. I'm the legislative consultant to the Queens and Bronx Building Association. Richard Seeker is actually one of our members, and we support his testimony, and the intro part of our testimony is actually dedicated to what he said, and we've summarized in the bullet points what we would like to see done. Also, we wanted to bring up something which is becoming an issue on 485X. We've had multiple builders look at the numbers on 485X. And even yesterday, I attended a conference in the Long Island City Partnership Summit. And a number of, since Adolfo, Deputy Mayor Carry On was there, a number of them were addressing him and saying that 485X above 99 units doesn't financially work. They go, they run the numbers, and immediately, even if they can do 150 units due to the zoning or anything done by City of Yes, they immediately realize they will not make any profit. They could potentially lose money, and they drop down the building size to 99 units, and all of a sudden the building becomes profitable. The wage rates are well-intentioned, but if you can't make money, you're not going to build, and you're going to figure out how you can make money and build, and 99 units becomes the threshold. And in areas which have higher wage rate requirements, the figure of the amount of units needed to be able to make it profitable is even higher. We're generally finding, and I asked yesterday at the Long Island City Summit, because within our organization, we're finding that the magic number is not 100 units, but 150 units that it should be at. And every single one of those developers gave me the same 150 unit number, and they're not part of our association. So everybody's reaching the same conclusion on 485X and what the threshold should be. And the city doesn't want to lose if somebody can build 150 units or 149 units and not lose 50 units. It should not want to lose those 50 units. So it's something that I think the council should seriously consider, the state should seriously consider, and look to revamp 485X so that it in fact is more in line with financial reality.
Thank you, Robert. Next, I'd like to call S. Gilbert.
You may begin.
Alex Stein.
You may begin.
Okay. If we have inadvertently missed anyone that has registered to testify today and has yet to be called, please use the Zoom raise hand function if you are testifying remotely, and you will be called in the order that your hand has been raised. If you are testifying in person, please come to the dais and speak to the sergeants. Seeing none, I will now close the hearing. Thank you to the members of the administration and the members of the public, and Chair Brannon for joining, co-chairing today. This hearing is adjourned.